than 6 million Cuban people hailed this man as their liberator. His name is Fidel Castro, and this is his biography. I'm Mike Wallace. This is Biography. Our story, Fidel Castro. He began as an idealist, a patriot who was hailed as the George Washington of Cuba. The island's turbulent history is the prologue to the rise of Fidel Castro. The 1920s. Cuba, pearl of the Antilles, once a proud possession of Spain, has been a nation on its own for only 2 decades. But 400 years of colonial rule have left the people poorly equipped for self-government. Politicians enrich themselves through graft and corruption. Many Cubans, hungry and illiterate, find mob violence the only outlet for their frustration. American warships are a common sight in Havana Harbor. The treaty ending the Spanish-American War has given the United States the right to intervene in Cuban affairs. American sailors and Marines call Havana a good liberty town, and many Cubans earn their living by catering to the Yankee dollar. Two-thirds of Cuba's income comes from one crop, sugar. Many peasants must live for the entire year on money earned during the harvest season. In 1926, on a sugar plantation in Oriente Province, Fidel Castro is born. A rich man's son, he is cloistered from the poverty and unrest that infect his country. Cuba's president and dictator is Gerardo Machado. The people call him the Butcher. Machado spends millions on roads, but critics say he has a formula. Out of every tax dollar spent, 20 cents goes into his own pocket. In 1933, Havana is paralyzed by a general strike. At first, a demand for higher wages. The strike erupts into a demonstration against Machado's rule. Storm into the palatial homes of Machado and his high officers. In the confusion, Machado slips out of the country. Fortified by millions of dollars he has deposited in foreign banks. In an orgy of looting and destruction, the people take revenge for 9 years of terror and corruption. Emerges from obscurity and assumes command of the army and the nation. He is Fulgencio Batista. A 32-year-old sergeant stationed at Central Headquarters, he had marshaled the support of key enlisted men and staged a revolt within the army. Now he declares himself chief of staff with the rank of colonel. At first, Batista apparently is unsure how far he can go. Intent on consolidating his own power within the military, he installs Dr. Ramon Grau San Martin, physician and university professor, as president of Cuba.
My cabinet is formed, and at last Cuba has a stable government.
But the power of Fulgencio Batista is all that is stable in Cuban governance. He makes presidents and breaks them. 7 in all in the next 6 years. Batista rules with an iron hand. Many who object are arrested and tried. The lucky ones, those who are not executed, are sent to the political prison on the Isle of Pine. For the next 20 years, that prison will be filled with Batista's enemies, patriots and rebels who spend their time swearing revenge on the dictator and plotting his downfall. During the 1930s, no citizen of Cuba can be sure where he stands. There is some progress and reform, but individual rights are granted or withdrawn at the whim of one man, Fulgencio Batista. 1939. Batista has used his power to acquire great wealth. And now, Batista wants to be president. He resigns as Army Chief of Staff and is named the candidate of a four-party coalition, including the Communists. The election is considered quiet and peaceful by Cuban standards. There are charges that Batista has stolen the vote, but reporters believe his overwhelming victory accurately reflects popular sentiment. Many Cubans, especially the largely illiterate peasant class, are unconcerned or don't even know about his dictatorial actions. Instead, they remember that Batista himself was born a peasant, and they are attracted by his earthy personality. Under his new constitution, Batista can hold office for only 4 years. Then he will step down and virtually retire from Cuban politics for 8 years. In 1942, 16-year-old Fidel Castro enters a Jesuit college in Havana. He is a top student and a fine athlete, starring in basketball, baseball, track, and soccer. A teacher says Fidel had to be the best at everything he did, and he tried everything. His greatest skill is debating. Fellow students are stirred by his powerful oratory. His yearbook says he will fill the book of his life with brilliant pages. He has good timber, and the actor in him will not be lacking. Castro enters the University of Havana Law School in 1945 and soon becomes a controversial leader in student politics. He attends the 1948 Inter-American Conference in Bogota, Colombia, as a student delegate. Communists hope to turn the meeting into a demonstration against U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall. Violent demonstrations are touched off by the murder of Colombia's Liberal Party leader. Castro takes part in the rioting and is slightly wounded. Later, he will be accused of being a communist and acting under orders from the party. But there is no evidence to support the charge. In 1952, Fulgencio Batista comes out of retirement and launches a campaign to regain control of Cuba. In surprise pre-dawn raids, specially recruited soldiers capture key government positions. Within hours, Batista has succeeded. He tells President Frio, "You are finished. I am the government." The United States recognizes his new regime. For the next 6 years, Batista uses American support as a personal political weapon. Again and again, he tells his people, "The U.S. is on my side. America is helping us to keep the dirty communists from taking over the government." But the dictator's iron fist breeds resentment. Small bands of Cubans now seek a means to overthrow the Batista regime. And one of these budding revolutionaries is a young lawyer named Fidel Castro. In the early 1950s, there is the growing rumble of rebellion in Cuba. University students stage protest demonstrations against the Batista regime. The dictator strikes back with police brutality and new attacks on civil liberties. Many rioters are defended in court by Dr. Fidel Castro, attorney at law. But in 1953, the young lawyer will carry his fight against Batista beyond the court. He will attempt to spark a full-scale rebellion. On July 26th, Castro leads 166 young rebels in an attack against Fort Moncada, a heavily armed base manned by 1,000 troops. Cubans fail to rally behind him, and most of Castro's men are captured. Many are tortured, mutilated, and killed. Castro is sentenced to 15 years in prison. Later, he will make the date of the attack, July 26th, the name of his revolutionary movement. Castro is permitted to leave prison after 22 months. He emerges a hero to many Cubans. Burning with the fanaticism of a self-proclaimed messiah, he will go to the United States and raise money from Cuban exiles to train an army of liberation. In December 1956, Castro and a handful of followers slip back into Cuba from a base in Mexico. He has pledged to overthrow the tyrant Batista or die. Castro sets up rebel headquarters in the rugged Sierra Maestra Mountains of Oriente province. 12 hungry men against a modern army of 40,000. But Fidel Castro is not an ordinary man. His followers say he can outshoot, outfight, outrun, outswim, outride, and outtalk any man in Cuba. And they worship him. Fidel attempts to enlist the sympathy of nearby peasants. His rebels set up schools in Cuba's backcountry and teach the peasants to read and write. Castro promises social and economic reform, individual freedom, and constitutional government. He sums up the goal of his revolution as liberty with bread and without terror. Batista at first scorns Castro and his movement, but new volunteers show up every day, and the rebels grow stronger. For nearly 2 years, Fidel's barbudos, the bearded ones, hit and run. They sweep down from the mountains, attack government posts, and then withdraw. Batista strikes back with jets and tanks, most of them made in the United States. And finally, he boasts that he has wiped out the rebels and killed Castro. In answer, Fidel brings American reporters to his mountain hideout. He tells them he is not a communist and denies charges of communist influence, although his top lieutenants, younger brother Raul Castro and Argentine physician Che Guevara, have long records of red activity. Throughout Cuba, Castro becomes the symbol of defiance to Batista and the rallying point for Cuban patriots. Every new rebel attack now draws brutal reprisal by Batista's army and secret police. Anyone suspected of favoring the rebel cause is arrested. Many are shot on the spot. Others are tortured and mutilated. The brutality serves only to strengthen the rebel movement. Funerals for Batista's victims become demonstrations of hatred for his regime. Batista realizes that he can no longer hope to crush Castro, that virtually his entire nation has rallied behind this bearded rebel. New Year's Day, 1959. The dictator, whom Castro has accused of stealing $300 million from the public till, flees to the Dominican Republic. Without a showdown battle, Fidel Castro has won. Savoring his victory, he spends a week barnstorming across the island to set the stage for his triumphant entry into Havana. He is a larger-than-life hero, not just in his own own country, but throughout Latin America. Rally at Camp Columbia, Batista's military headquarters. Castro speaks quietly, a white dove perched on his shoulder. His words are ironically prophetic. The combat phase of the revolution is over. Who could be the worst enemy of the revolution? Who could defeat our aims at the moment of triumph? We revolutionaries ourselves could be our own worst enemy if we do not settle down to the peaceful aims of the revolution. Castro has accused the Batista forces of 20,000 murders. Now, he takes revenge through a series of war crimes trials that convict and execute more than 600 Army and police officers. Brother Raul presides over a mass execution in Santiago. 74 convicted war criminals are lined up, shot, and buried in a ditch by a bulldozer. Although his government declares itself neutral in the Cold War, anti-American signs begin appearing in the streets of Havana. American concern increases as Castro makes trade deals with the Soviet Union, China, and other communist countries. Cuban peasants who had been promised their own land find themselves working on state-owned collective farms. Production drops, and volunteers from the cities are ordered to help bring in the vital sugar crop. Castro keeps his promise to wipe out illiteracy. But along with reading and writing, Cuban youngsters are taught to worship Fidel and hate the United States. Castro had promised foreign investments will always be welcome and secure. He confiscates American industry. He had promised enlightened capitalism. He delivers state socialism. He had promised independence. He delivers his country into the embrace of the Russian bear. Serious food shortages develop in Fidel's socialist paradise, and Castro applies a technique used by all dictators. When he can't give the people bread, he gives them circuses. Refugees from the diet of Castro's slogans say, "We had a plate of fatherland or death in the morning and a bowl of we shall win in the afternoon." He trains and equips a militia of 100,000 men and women. This will become Fidel's private army, 100,000 pairs of eyes and ears to seek out opposition. Cubans, including some of Castro's earliest supporters, now feel he has merely replaced Batista's brand of tyranny with his own. They see their government being turned over to known communists, and they leave the country. As Castro himself had done only 5 years before, they raise money and begin training an army to liberate their homeland. April 1961. In Cuba's Bay of Pigs, Castro's army repels an invasion by 1,400 men. The attackers are Cuban exiles, equipped by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. They hope to free their country. They hope to inspire their countrymen to rise up against the dictator. But Castro knew in advance that they were coming. He had arrested 100,000 Cubans who might have taken action against his regime. There is no rebellion. Becomes a disaster for the Cuban exiles and for the United States. Castro claims a major victory. His photographers portray him in his favorite role, the hero leading the defense of the fatherland. The abortive invasion strengthens Castro's hold on Cuba. On May Day, 1961, he proclaims a socialist republic. All pretense is gone. I am a Marxist-Leninist, he says, and I will be one until the last day of my life. By the fall of 1962, Cuba is a military outpost of the Soviet Union. Construction of ballistic missile bases is nearly complete when the United States draws the line. A naval blockade is thrown around Cuba, and the U.S. mobilizes its armed forces. President Kennedy makes it clear that nuclear war is an agonizing possibility.
We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the cost of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced.
For 12 anxious days, the fate of civilization hangs in the balance of this confrontation between the U.S. and the USSR. Finally, the Kremlin backs down. The Soviets ship their rockets home. Fidel Castro has made Cuba a pawn in the Cold War. There is a revolution because there is tyranny. There is a revolution because there is injustice. There is and there will be a revolution as long as there is a shadow of a threat against our rights and our freedom. The author of that eloquent plea for liberty was Fidel Castro. Mike Wallace for Biography.